The nurse was changing the young man's clothes, her hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who had done this countless times before. As she lifted his shirt, her fingers brushed against something unusual. At first, she thought it was nothing, a simple bruise or some minor injury she hadn't noticed earlier. But the more she touched, the more she realized that something was off. There, on his side, was a small, raised area on his skin. It was almost like a birthmark, but not quite. The texture felt different, rougher than the surrounding skin, and the color was slightly off, darker, almost purplish. Curious, the nurse gently pressed her fingers to it. She had been working in the hospital for years, and she'd seen a lot of injuries and conditions, but she'd never seen anything like this. She pulled the sheet back further to get a better look, her brow furrowing. She knew something wasn't right. The young man had been unconscious ever since he was admitted, his vital signs stable but without any clear cause for his condition. The doctors hadn't been able to diagnose him, and it seemed like his illness was a mystery. Before she could call for the doctor, the young man shifted slightly, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at her, confusion in his eyes, as if he wasn't sure where he was. The nurse took a step back, surprised by the sudden movement. "You're awake," she said softly, trying to gauge if he was aware of what was happening. He blinked a few times, then slowly raised a hand to his side, touching the strange mark she had just discovered. His fingers trembled as he traced the area. "I don't know what's happening," he whispered hoarsely, his voice weak but full of unease. "I've never had this before." The doctor arrived within minutes, his face a mixture of curiosity and routine professionalism. "What's the issue, nurse?" he asked, glancing briefly at the young man lying unconscious on the bed. The nurse hesitated for a moment, her fingers still lingering near the strange mark on the young man's side. "I noticed this," she said, gently lifting his shirt once again. "It's like a raised area under the skin, and I've never seen anything quite like it. It's not a bruise, and it's not from any surgery." Dr. Reynolds leaned in, inspecting the mark closely. He frowned, running his fingers gently over the irregular shape. It doesn't look like anything I've encountered either." He paused for a moment, deep in thought, before turning to the nurse. "Let's run a few tests just to rule out anything serious. It might be something we're not familiar with." The nurse nodded, feeling a bit of relief. It wasn't just her being overly cautious. The doctor had acknowledged something was off. Minutes later, the young man was hooked up to N4 and the necessary equipment for testing. The nurse stood by, her eyes lingering on the mark, still wondering what could have caused it. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of machines and the occasional shuffle of the doctor's steps as he checked the monitors. The tests were being processed, but as the nurse waited, the young man began to stir. His eyes fluttered open, and he blinked, confused and disoriented. Where am I?" His voice was weak, but clear. "You're in the hospital," the nurse replied gently. "You were unconscious when you arrived. Can you tell me your name?" The young man's brow furrowed as he tried to focus. For a moment, his eyes seemed distant, lost in thought. Then, with a soft sigh, he answered, "David. My name is David." Dr. Reynolds, who had been standing by the computer, looked back at the young man. "David, can you tell us what happened? Do you remember anything about what brought you here?" David's face twisted with confusion. I don't. I don't remember. I woke up and I felt this pain, a sharp pain in my side, and then nothing. The nurse's eyes drifted back to the mark on his side. The pain he described, was it connected to it? Was it the cause of his condition? We're going to run a few more tests, Dr. Reynolds said, giving David a reassuring smile. We'll find out what's going on. As the nurse turned to leave the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a physical injury or illness. There was something deeper, something about this case that didn't add up. Later that evening, as the results came in, the nurse found herself alone in the lab, scrolling through the test results. Everything seemed normal at first, no infections, no obvious medical issues. But then, something caught her eye. The results for David's blood showed traces of an unknown substance, something that didn't belong in the human body. Her heart skipped a beat as she read further. The substance was unfamiliar to her, and according to the report, it wasn't a chemical compound commonly found in pharmaceuticals. What the hell is this? She whispered to herself, staring at the screen. Her hand hovered over the phone, ready to call the doctor, but something held her back. The nurse knew one thing for sure now. This wasn't just a typical case. David's condition was far from ordinary, and whatever was happening inside him, it wasn't something she was prepared for. The nurse sat there for a moment, staring at the results on the screen. The substance found in David's blood didn't match any known toxins, medications, or infections. It was something foreign, something unusual. Her mind raced, trying to think of what could explain this anomaly. Her finger hovered over the phone for a long time before she finally dialed Dr. Reynolds. It was late, but she knew she couldn't wait until morning to discuss this. The urgency in her voice as she spoke to him was clear. Doctor, you need to see this. There's something in David's blood that... it's not right. Moments later, Dr. Reynolds arrived at the lab, his face serious. What did you find? He asked, stepping toward the computer where the results were displayed. The nurse quickly explained the findings, pointing out the unusual substance in the blood work. It's not something I've ever seen before. I've checked everything, and I can't find any match in the database. Dr. Reynolds leaned in, examining the results with a frown. His brow furrowed as he scrolled through the data, clearly concerned. This doesn't make sense. It's not a contaminant, but it's not anything we can identify either. We'll need to run more tests. As he turned to leave, the nurse hesitated. Do you think it could be related to the mark on his side? She asked. Dr. Reynolds paused and looked back at her. It's a possibility. I'll ask the radiology team to get some images of the area. Maybe there's something deeper going on. Later that night, the radiology team conducted an imaging scan of David's side, and the results were startling. The mark that had seemed so innocuous at first glance turned out to be far more complex. The scans revealed an irregular, almost metallic-like object embedded just beneath the skin. It wasn't visible to the naked eye, but the imaging showed it clearly. Something foreign, something that didn't belong. Dr. Reynolds reviewed the images with a mix of confusion and disbelief. This isn't natural. It looks like some sort of implant. The nurse stared at the images, her mind reeling. An implant? But who would have placed it there and why? And why hadn't David noticed it before? They returned to David's room where he was resting, still weak but now more aware of his surroundings. When they showed him the scans, his expression changed. For the first time since he'd woken up, he seemed visibly shaken. "I didn't put that there," David whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know what that is. I've never seen anything like it." The nurse noticed his hands were shaking now, his eyes wide with fear. "But how could it be there if you didn't put it there?" she asked gently. David closed his eyes, taking a slow, shaky breath. "I don't remember much, but I have this feeling, like someone did something to me, something I couldn't stop." The nurse and Dr. Reynolds exchanged a glance. It seemed David was starting to remember fragments of something, but he wasn't ready to share everything just yet. "We need to figure out what this implant is, who put it there, and why it's affecting you this way," Dr. Reynolds said firmly. "But right now, we need to keep you monitored closely." Over the next few days, David underwent a series of tests to try and uncover the mystery behind the implant. More and more, it became clear that whatever was happening to him, it wasn't by accident. Someone or something had placed that object inside him, and it was affecting his body in ways that no one could explain. The nurse worked tirelessly alongside the medical team, trying to piece together any clues that might help them understand the purpose of the implant. They sent samples of David's blood to external labs, reached out to specialists, and consulted with researchers who had expertise in foreign medical technologies. But nothing came back that provided any answers. Then, one night, David had a breakthrough. He woke up in the middle of the night, his face pale and covered in sweat. His breathing was shallow, and his heart rate was elevated. The nurse rushed to his side. "David, are you okay?" He looked at her with wide, frightened eyes. I remember who did this to me." Her heart skipped a beat. "Who?" David's eyes seemed to look far beyond her, lost in some distant memory. "They told me not to talk about it. But now, it's all coming back. It was an experiment, a way to control people, to track them, to—" Before he could finish his sentence, his body tensed, and a violent seizure overtook him. The nurse immediately called for help, but it was clear something was very wrong. David's condition deteriorated rapidly, his body convulsing uncontrollably. Machines started beeping frantically as his heart rate and blood pressure dropped dangerously low. Dr. Reynolds and the medical team arrived in a flurry of activity, but despite their best efforts, David's heart stopped beating. The room fell silent. The nurse stood frozen, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. David had been the victim of something far more sinister than anyone had imagined. Someone had experimented on him, and now it was too late to save him. As the team began to work on resuscitation, the nurse couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever had been done to David, it had unleashed something far more dangerous. She had a sinking feeling that the mystery surrounding him wasn't going to disappear with his death, and soon others might be drawn into the same nightmare. Despite all efforts to resuscitate David, the reality of his death settled in. The machines continued to beep a harsh, sterile tune as the team, powerless, stepped back. The nurse stood motionless, staring at the lifeless body of the young man who had been caught in something far bigger than any of them could comprehend. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the soft, distant hum of the hospital. The nurse took one last look at David's body, her mind still reeling from everything that had happened. But there was something more. She knew, deep down, that David's death was not the end. It was a signal, a beginning of something darker and more sinister. As she turned to leave the room, her phone buzzed. It was a message from the external lab that had been analyzing David's blood work. "We found something. You need to come see us immediately." A chill ran down her spine. The nurse walked quickly to the lab, the sense of urgency growing with every step. She pushed open the door and was met by the lab technician, who handed her a thick folder. "We found traces of a tracking device," the technician said quietly. "But not just any tracking device. It's a bioengineered chip that's capable of transmitting information, not just location, but physiological data. Real-time monitoring of a person's physical state." The nurse felt a cold shiver spread through her. "It gets worse," the technician continued. "This device is connected to an advanced network, which we can't trace. Whoever placed it in David has been monitoring him all along." Suddenly, the pieces started to fall into place. The implant, the strange blood results, the mysterious illness. David had been a subject of a high-tech experiment, perhaps part of something even larger than they could have imagined. "We're not done yet," the nurse murmured, her voice steady but determined. "We need to find out who did this to him, and why." The technician nodded gravely. "We're only scratching the surface. But I'm afraid whatever this is, it's not just happening here. It's a global network, and we may have just opened Pandora's box." The nurse left the lab, her thoughts racing. She knew she had to pursue this, no matter where it led or what dangers lay ahead. The answers were out there, hidden deep within a network of experiments and secrets that had been kept in the shadows for far too long. And as she walked down the hallway, the feeling that she had just stepped into something much larger, much more dangerous, consumed her. The story of David's death was only the first chapter in a tale that would take her to places she never imagined. She was no longer just a nurse. She had become part of a much larger puzzle, one that would uncover truths about the world she never wanted to know. The chase for answers had only just begun.